Hi everyone, my name is Andrew. I'm a Master of Applied Science candidate in ECE.
I'm Lenny. I'm a master's student of Electrical and Computer Engineering, first year from ECE.
And I'm Nicole, and I'm completing a Master's of Education. Everybody just bear with me because I'm really sick today. So SpeechCoach, well, why did we end up developing it? Believe it or not, the #1 fear in North America is actually public speaking. And to put this in perspective for you guys, the #2 fear is death. And so in the words of comedian Jerry Seinfeld, most of us attending a funeral would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. But whether or not you'd rather be in a coffin than delivering a public speech, most of us will have to present at some point in our lives. And our nerves can have a really negative impact on the way that we perform. So you can think of the professor who speaks so quickly that students don't understand what's actually being said. You can think of the student who presents their materials with their back to the audience, reading off their slides, and nobody is really engaged. And you can think of the sales associate who sometimes delivers their sales pitch by nervously shuffling, and people wonder, like, does this person really know what they're talking about? But it's not just nerves that contribute to bad habits during presentations. See, giving a presentation is actually really difficult, and the only feedback that we traditionally receive is the sound of our own voice. And so this leads to us contemplating what we're saying, but not necessarily how well we're saying it. And so whether you're an expert or novice, whether you're nervous or not, it would be useful to have feedback on how well you're delivering your message so you can change bad habits before they ruin your presentation. Now, this is where we run into issues because it actually takes all of our language processing centers to give a coherent speech. And so if somebody is giving you feedback in the form of language, it ends up overloading the whole system. This is why having a teacher interrupt you to say, hey, speak up, it ruins the whole flow of your presentation. So what SpeechCoach does is it gives feedback in the form of tactile feedback so that users can contemplate what they're saying and how well they're saying it simultaneously. And eventually, we're looking at giving pictorial feedback, but we'll touch on that a little bit more later.
So in this project, we want to focus on 3 core features. We select them based on the usefulness. First, the speech rate. We want to give feedback to presenters if they are talking too fast. So our app detects if the user is exceeding a certain words per minute threshold that's deemed acceptable for speeches. And second, the movement. We want to notify the users if they are moving too much and become disruptive to the audience. And lastly, the orientation is simply to detect if the presenter is facing audience rather than facing away. A bit more detail about implementation. So the speech rate algorithm relies on the syllable detection algorithm that we find from research papers. So it starts from processing the raw signal received from microphone, and we perform a series of digital signal processing to obtain such a waveform. As you can see, all these red dots are corresponding to syllables. So from here, we can count the number of syllables and estimate the number of words. Orientation detection is very similar to the Compass apps in our phones. It requires 2 sensors. One is the magnetic field sensor and an accelerometer. So from the acquired data, we can compute the facing angle. Lastly, movement. Our implementation actually bases on an open source pedometer app. It analyzes the accelerometer data and count the number of steps. We actually modify it in a way such that it can better react to the nervous shuffle in real presentation. So now we will do a demo.
Demo time. So when you first open SpeechCoach, you're brought to the last presentation you've been working on. So here I was working on a presentation called King's Speech. From here, I can open SpeechCoach's side menu where I can see a list of all the presentations I've been working on. I can also use the plus symbol at the top to add a new presentation if I need to. Now, since I'm giving a presentation related to our final demo, that's the one I'm going to select. SpeechCoach takes me to the home page of the final demo presentation. From here, I can select which features I want detected in my presentation using the toggle button. I can also use the settings button for each of the features to configure the settings related to each of them. So for example, if I press the settings button for speech rate, I can select at which speech rate I want SpeechCoach to notify me, and with what vibration pattern I want it to use. When I'm ready to begin a practice session of my presentation, I just need to press start. So now I'm going to demonstrate to you guys SpeechCoach in action. To keep this in mind, it's going to vibrate for me, but SpeechCoach will turn yellow for you guys when I'm facing the wrong way. It'll turn blue when I'm moving too much, and it'll turn green when I'm speaking too fast. So now I'm going to press start. SpeechCoach instructs me to place the phone in my pocket, face you guys, the audience, and tap the screen when I'm ready. Now SpeechCoach is detecting my presentation. So let's say I were to absent-mindedly face my PowerPoint slides during my presentation. You guys are engaged, and I'm facing you guys. You see it turns yellow, detects I've been facing the wrong way, and it vibrates for me, notifying me that I should face you guys instead. And let's say I were to, I'm nervous, I'm sort of nervously shuffling during my presentation. SpeechCoach can also detect this, turns blue, and vibrates in my pocket for me, letting me know. Now, lastly, SpeechCoach will turn green if I am speaking too quickly. So I'm going to read a transcript at a relatively fast speech rate, and SpeechCoach will detect this. So if I were to tell you that public speaking anxiety, so let me say that if public speaking anxiety is the most common phobia in North American society, with approximately 75% of the population experiencing it, one of the best ways to conquer this fear is to increase the speaker's confidence in their ability to deliver a speech. This is the aim of SpeechCoach, and you see that SpeechCoach detects this, vibrates 3 times for me, and turns green for you guys. So when I'm ready to end my presentation, I can pull SpeechCoach out of my pocket and press end. SpeechCoach then takes me to a summary page where it summarizes my presentation. So here I can see that on average, my speech rate was good. It was below the optimal threshold I had set. However, there was that peak moment of my speech rate where I exceeded my optimal threshold. I can also see that 97% of the time I was facing the right direction, which was you guys. However, there was that 2% where I was absentmindedly facing my PowerPoint slides. Lastly, SpeechCoach detects or shows me my top 10 movement moments during my presentation. So here I can see that there were a few moments where I was a little fidgety, borderline restless, and I should be aware of that next time I give the speech. I can also from here view my past practices using the button at the bottom. I can see how well I did in comparison to last time I gave this presentation. So let's go back to the presentation. We learned a lot in the development of SpeechCoach. The first thing is that we discovered that appropriate presentation movement can be very subjective from person to person. And that poses a great challenge when trying to give objective feedback on a user's movement. We also discovered that during a presentation, you're so focused on your speech content that it's very difficult to distinguish between the different types of vibration patterns happening in your pocket. And lastly, we discovered that detecting speech rate is very, very difficult. You guys noticed that there was one point where it flashed green for me, saying that I was speaking too fast, but to you and I think I was speaking fairly normally. This can be attributed to 2 factors. 1, different phones having different hardware, and 2, the algorithm detecting differently based on the user's voice. So there was a lot of fine-tuning happening with the algorithm, and we plan on continuing that development. Which brings me to our future goals. To address these issues and to expand on SpeechCoach, we hope to first implement laptop to phone communication in order to give visual feedback, as well as potentially sync the phone with the PowerPoint slides. We also want to refine our algorithms for speech rate and movement detection, and potentially implement a feature that can detect the number if you're repeating words repeatedly during your presentation. And lastly, of course, we want to do extensive user testing to get feedback on their use cases for our app. And with that, we'd like to get your feedback and questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering from an operant conditioning point of view. In practice, you're not going to be nervous, you're not going to be fidgeting, so you're not going to get that input from the device. Now you're doing your presentation, you're fidgeting, you're anxious, maybe speech, and now you've got something vibrating, a negative reinforcer that you're trying to escape from, so it just will not perhaps add to the anxiety.
Yeah, so what you're saying, I don't think we actually mentioned this in our presentation, but yeah, you're meant to practice with it, and you do, even in practice, if there are certain tendencies that you have, you still sometimes exhibit those in practice, and so you shouldn't just practice once or twice, you should practice many times, and at some point you will get the feedback that you're going to get during your presentation. Or that's our assumption. We're hoping that that's the way it works out. But hopefully when we do more user testing, we'll get a better idea of how users feel. Thank you.
I was wondering about the results that you had for movement. They seem to be from the most movement you did down to the least movement. Now, is there a way of seeing that based on where in your presentation? Because there might be certain places you fidget more or whatever. Just wanting to talk.
So that is one of our future goals, is actually to sync movement feedback with time. So at the end, you can actually see where specific points in your presentation you were moving more. And this will help greatly when we're synced with the PowerPoint slides. So we can actually tell the user at this slide, you were moving like crazy. And the user can get, I guess, more meaningful feedback from that. So that's definitely a direction we want to go.
Thank you.
I was going to share.
So you said that you're supposed to practice with the app, and when you're actually presenting, you're not going to use it. But once
No.
No,
Just
you use
that
it.
you practice with it and then you get used to the feedback during your practice so that when you present and it gives you feedback, you're not nervous about it. But you definitely should use it during your actual presentation.
Another question, how do you set the orientation? So how do you know the audience is here, and and what's the angle?
Yep.
Like
So if you'll notice, when I started my presentation, the phone told me to place it in my pocket, face you guys, and then tap the screen. So that's my benchmark. This is the ideal orientation. And then based on that, I can detect if I've deviated too far away from my audience.